Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to award-winning Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network. I am your host, Rick Loayza, and this is the podcast where we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. We are bringing old-school basketball to a new-school audience, and today we bring you the story of the history of the big man. Basketball, by and large, is the territory of human beings who are at the extreme end of the bell curve in terms of height. The average height of a male in the world in 2024 is 5'7.5" or 170 centimeters. Again, that is the global average. In the NBA, the average height is 6'7" or 201 centimeters. That is extreme height. Now let us take a look at what is considered a big man in the NBA. You are talking about a player who is 7 feet tall or taller. That is 213 centimeters. Now, to be that tall and between the ages of 18 and 35 and have the athletic ability to participate in the NBA, that is like holding a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory. That player is literally 1 in a million. And extreme height makes sense for the NBA. The taller a player is, the closer he is to the basket. So of course, any team would want the tallest and most athletic players they can find. It is an advantage in the game to have taller players, and I think that every basketball fan understands that. However, that is not always how it was. It took nearly 30 years for the consensus to come around to the idea that taller was better, assuming that there was still a modicum of actual basketball talent. Now, in the early 1900s, the average professional basketball player was 5'8" or 173 centimeters. That is barely taller than the average male in 2024. So, in the first 30 years of the game, the best players around were not necessarily that tall. The early great players could easily blend in with the crowd and likely go unnoticed. Now, when the game was first invented in 1891, nobody had any idea what type of body would be best suited for the new game. When Dr. Naismith invented his game, they were simply trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work. The game, in a very real way, was in its infancy. We had yet to see what the game would look like as it grew up and developed. That means that in the early 1900s, if a player was 5'10" or 178 centimeters, that player was probably the tallest on the team and would have been considered the big man. Therefore, most teams and coaches focused on speed and agility. In other words, they were looking for the physical qualities that would make someone a good soccer player or international football player. They just wanted guys who were athletic and fast, and I do not blame them. It takes time to figure out what makes a good athlete for a particular sport, especially when that sport is brand new. One of the first really tall players was a guy by the name of Francis Meehan, and he played at Seton Hall University in New Jersey and then played in the Eastern League starting in 1919. Meehan was 6'7" or 201 centimeters. Now, for most people, he was defying the limits of human height at the time that he played. Now, the thing with Meehan is that he was not actually a very good basketball player. He was slow and not athletic at all. So why was he even on the team, and why was he paid as a professional player? Well, his height helped with the center jump, and this was a product of its time. Up until the 1920s, basketball would have a tip-off after every made basket, and this is where Meehan proved his worth. His height practically guaranteed that his team would win the tip. He would get the ball for his team would then make a basket, and then he would head to center court for the next tip-off, and he would win it again. And he would do this over and over and over, practically guaranteeing that his team would maintain possession of the ball for nearly the entire game. But once the ball was in play, Meehan was virtually worthless as a player, but other teams had similar ideas, and it seems that every good team out there got themselves the tallest player they could find to be their tip-off specialist. Often, these extremely tall players lacked quickness and athleticism. They were awkward and uncoordinated as they were usually dealing with other health issues related to their extreme height. However, by the end of the 1920s, the center jump was eliminated from basketball after every made basket. The center jump became something that only happened at the beginning of the game, or at worst, the beginning of each half. This rule change all but eliminated these really tall but unathletic players. Now, one of the very early big men of the 1920s was a guy named Joe Lapchick. He was 6'5" or 196 centimeters, and he was considered a freak compared to the general population. He once shared stories of being stared at anytime he went out in public, and he would get questioned, made fun of. It was not pleasant for him, and he was one of the very first big men who was not some clumsy and uncoordinated giant like many of the other big men of his day. Lapchick was truly athletic. He would dribble, run, shoot, pass, and was an overall incredible player. Prior to 1950, Lapchick was considered one of the top 10 players of all time. He is in the Hall of Fame today because of how he played back then. He was legitimately an athletic and tall player. Now, over time, players started to get taller, but also athletic, and the game of basketball began to transform from a game of good but average-sized athletes to the territory of giants. In other words, it began to look a lot more like modern basketball. And I will be right back with more on the history of the big man right after this.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with a retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorium Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.
Hello, sports history fans. I'm Ross from the podcast Pigskin Tales. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first, let's dive into today's sponsor, just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique, budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched into words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. My favorite on the site is Bryce Harper 2021 MVP year. Because I'm a big stats guy, I think that's one of the coolest things ever. Check it out. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved one this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those who you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for 15% off at artofwords.com.
Welcome back to the show, and let us continue our story on the history of the big man. Prior to the break, I shared how most really good basketball players prior to the 1930s were average-sized guys who were really quick and athletic. But in the 1930s is when some really tall athletes began to pop up. We had a guy by the name of Tiny Hearn, who was 6'9". There was also Howie Ballerman, who was 6'8". The National Basketball League in the late 1930s featured a player who was 6'11" by the name of Mylon Schoen. The game was in the midst of a massive transformation. But in the 1940s, we saw two players who completely defied what was possible for an athlete with extreme height. Those players were George Mikan and Bob Kurlan. Mikan was 6'10" or 208 centimeters. Kurlan was 7 feet tall or 213 centimeters. But here was the thing, by the standards of the 1940s, both players were extremely skilled basketball players. Now, if I am being honest, if we were to take prime George Mikan and bring him to 2024, he would probably not even make an NBA team. But that is not his fault. It's just that in the 80 years since he played, the landscape of basketball has completely changed. And the best thing that we can do is to simply judge guys like Mikan and Kurlan by the standards of their own day. And again, they were as talented as anybody back in their day. But simply because of George Mikan, every other team in professional basketball was on the hunt for a big man of their own who could adequately defend Mikan. The man led the Lakers to 6 league championships, 5 in the NBA, and 1 in their old league called the NBL. By the 1950s, not only were the big men getting taller, but every position was getting taller. Point guards, generally considered the shortest of the 5 positions, were getting to nearly 6 feet tall or 183 centimeters. By the mid-1950s, there was a high school kid from Philadelphia who was 7'1" or 216 centimeters, and he was freakishly athletic. He was strong, fast, athletic, coordinated, and agile. If you did not know any better, you would have thought that this player came to us from the heights of Mount Olympus. This man was the son of Zeus himself. And of course, I am talking about Wilt Chamberlain, who completely broke the mold on everything anybody thought a basketball player could be. He defied the imagination of the average basketball fan. Chamberlain started a parade of extremely tall and extremely athletic players. Nate Thurman, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Elvin Hayes, Artis Gilmore, Bill Walton, Moses Malone, Robert Parrish, Akeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal, Dikembe Mutombo, Dwight Howard, Rudy Gobert, Joel Embiid, and Nikola Jokic. And if I'm forgetting somebody, I do apologize. And as of 2024, the NBA now has a player by the name of Victor Wembanyama from France. He is 7'4" or 224 centimeters, and he can do everything on the court. He dribbles, he passes, he shoots the three. He can cross over his defender and then drive in for the dunk. He can step back for that three-pointer. How do you defend that? Now, there are multiple reasons why players are so much taller today than in previous generations. In the NBA today, we have 70 players who are 7 feet tall or taller. The NBA has never been taller than it is right now. And one of the reasons for this jump in height is improvements in nutrition over the last 100 years or so. The more we learn about vitamins and overall healthy eating has contributed to this increase in height. The more nutritious of a diet that someone can eat in their childhood, the better the chances are that they will be extremely tall. In other words, generally speaking, people in developed nations eat better than they did 100 years ago. Now, I don't want to turn this into an episode on human nutrition and development. That is not my point. The point is that over the last 130 years during the history of basketball, the height of the player has become increasingly more important. Now, I attended Santa Clara University back in the 1990s, and we had a player on our basketball team from France who was 7 feet tall. His name was Philip von Buchwald, and he and I lived in the same dormitory for 2 years, and we became friendly. He knew how much I loved the game of basketball, and we actually had several conversations about his transition to playing in the United States, because back in France, he was a superstar for his age group, but in the United States, he mostly came off the bench for the team as the backup center. The first time I met him, I was absolutely shocked by his height. Now, over time, I got used to it and it became quite normal to hang out with somebody who was that tall. And I also remember that he had to duck his head anytime he walked through a doorway. He also had to sleep in the fetal position because the beds in our dorm rooms had footboards, so he could not stretch out his legs all the way out. But he was a good dude with a good heart. And as I put together this episode, a thought crossed my mind. What do you think the reaction would be if we were to take Victor Wembanyama and put him in a time machine and take him back to the 1920s? It would probably be one of two outcomes. The first is that he would have completely destroyed the game of basketball because everybody else would have switched to a different sport after watching him play. Or, alternately, the top players would have watched him play and then incorporated Victor's moves into their own games, thereby forcing a quantum leap in the development of the individual player. Now, either way, his impact would be undeniable. Now, the good thing is that in reality, we don't have a time machine. But we can still look at a player like Wembanyama and see with our own eyes the results of 130 years of basketball and human development in one man. I cannot even imagine what players will look like in 30 or 40 years from now. And I just hope I'm still around to see it. I think it is possible that we might see our first 8-foot player come into the NBA. Well, that's a lot on the big man, and I thank you for hanging out with us, but that is going to be it for today. That is our story and trip through the history to see the development of the big man. Join us next time when we share the story of Bobby Plump. He was the real-life high school player that inspired the character of Jimmy Chitwood from the movie Hoosiers. That's next time on Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. And there you will find shorter historical posts as well as comments and discussion starters on today's game. I'll also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories in the past. Take care and see you soon.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.